Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar series. This is webinar number 33 that we've done in a row since the end of March, every Tuesday and Thursday. There's a number of you that have been to most, if not all of them, and we certainly appreciate that. Thank you very much. A couple things we always talk about when we first get started: the question and answer box. Make sure you push that button and have that open. If you have a question that myself or Eric can answer during the webinar that you want to make sure we try to see, go ahead and put it into the question and answer box. That will help us. The chat box goes by really quickly, and it's love to have everybody being able to watch and chat amongst themselves in the chat box. But meanwhile, it's a little hard for Eric and I to pick those out. So in the chat box itself, make sure that when you're typing in, you go down to the bottom and you change that to all panelists and attendees on the little pull down there. If by default it just goes to all the panelists, so only we can see it, and all of your new friends in the chat box won't be able to chat back and forth with you. So perfect. I appreciate everybody being here. Continue to plug in where you're from, and everything. It's always fun. We all do go back and Eric and I certainly, that we didn't get a chance to watch the chat, we go back and read it later. So lots of good fun being had in there. So continue to do that. Okay, I appreciate it, everybody. It's again, welcome. We've got a co-host today. It's Eric Gunderson from Point Karting, and what we're going to talk about today is initial karting data review. It's part of this couple of weeks that we've been doing this, where we early on in the webinar series, we talked a lot about functionality and some basic things, and we were just building the level of some of you guys that are fairly new to this, and now this last couple of weeks we've been talking about, okay, well, what do you do with it? I've got my data, now what, right? So and the other thing that we're making sure that and hoping that everybody understands is while last week we talked about sports car data, and today we're talking about karting data, and next week we'll be talking about dirt oval data and motorcycle data, a few sessions after that, and looking at it in the same exact way. But in reality, from a learning standpoint, even if you don't race karts, or you don't race motorcycles or dirt oval, listening to these folks that use this hardware and look into their data, there's always value for you, even if you're a racer of a different form of motorsports. Just looking at how other people take a look at the data and set up their screens, and it's still motorsports, and it's still, you're trying to do the same thing. You're trying to be as fast from point A to point B over the biggest number of laps. So it's I think there's value for everybody here, even if you don't race karts. And of course there's always value to the guys that are racing karts to even see their form of data as well. So welcome to everybody. I hope you get some good out of it. Those of you watching on YouTube later, I appreciate you being here as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to just do I always like to start it off with a quick poll, and so let's launch this first poll, and it's what it is it's what owned AIM devices do you have? What are you using as part of your data gathering that you especially on your AIM products, right? So plug them in there. If you have something that's other, go ahead and plug in other, and then into the chat box say other equals, and then whatever your device is. I always try to tie these things together in the days after the webinars. These polls are, they're somewhat fun, and we have a good time with them, but it really is helping us to judge and continue to plan what our webinars are in the future. So keep that in mind. All good. So and by the way, all of you that are registered got an email note. It might have got lost in the shuffle, but we did go ahead and extend the end of this through the end of August. So we are planning, and you can put it onto your calendar, and hopefully you can show up on Tuesdays and Thursdays, is we're going to do these at least through the end of August, and every Tuesday, every Thursday, and we'll see where the what the schedule looks like at that point. If everybody's super busy and doing something out at the racetrack, and maybe we thin it down to one, or we continue at two, or we'll just make that call at the point. But as of now, we're good to the through the end of August. So I appreciate that. Okay, let's go ahead and end that polling, and let's do some introductions of Eric, and have him tell us a little bit about himself. I'll kind of start it off a little bit. Eric, again, this is his second time he's co-hosted with us. He got very, very good reviews. Afterwards, I heard that day and the next day, quite a few emails and some other things that were coming in. And boy, I really enjoyed the way that Eric put the way he presented the information, the methodical way that he walked through, problem solving and things like that. So certainly we wanted him back, and we're just tickled to have him here at his second time. So Eric, give us a little bit of background from you. Got a little bit of information on the screen here, but give us a little bit more about you, and then we'll start to jump into the information.
Sure. Well, to those of you that didn't join us on my first webinar, my name is Eric Gunderson. I'm the owner of Point Karting and pointkarting.com, and we're based in Colorado. We are sales and retail.
Oops, you just went. Your microphone went off for some reason, Eric.
My microphone.
There you go.
Went
there
off.
You got it. You got it. It's back. It's back.
Yeah. Can you hear me, guys?
I can hear you now. Keep on driving.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Well, my name is Eric, and I own pointkarting.com. We're a karting sales and retail business. Sounds like I'm a little bit loud.
You're doing it. Sounds good on my end. So you just continue on.
Been involved in karting for probably about 15 years now. As a racer, as a volunteer with a karting series, as someone that's now into data quite a bit, and as a driver coach, and just viewing the sport from different aspects. So in the last several years, I've become much more familiar with Race Studio, the AIM Micron product, and now I'm very happy to be an AIM Micron dealer. So we use data regularly at the track, and I coach drivers all the way from age 5 or 6 all the way up to 65, using fundamentally these same tools. So as Roger alluded to, data is a tool in your toolbox, and whether in karting or in other forms of motorsport, which I've been fortunate to be exposed to, it's something that you can use at the track all the time. But I'm looking forward to just chatting about, hopefully in this seminar, a little bit more about and applied what you would do at a kart race to look at data.
Perfect, and you live in a beautiful part of the country as well down there, so
yes.
It's very, very, very nice. I do see a couple people said you were loud, but then everything got really good there towards with your audio, so perfect. I think the next thing we're going to probably do is I'm going to go ahead and let's see if I can get this to work. Let's see. There we go. Oops, wrong way. The next thing I think we're going to do is we're going to jump right into some live data into Race Studio 2, and I'm going to open that up. But the next thing I'm going to do is real quickly before we even start is launch another poll. And when we get done, we'll run this for about a minute. So you can pick all the ones that are kind of what you typically do. And what the question is how often do you look at your racing data? This is going to kind of tie in with some of the stuff that Eric's going to talk about. It's a multiple choice, but you grab the ones that you typically do, and if it's other, give some detail in the chat box, just like we did. We're going to leave this go for about a minute or so, and then we'll share the results. We'll chat about them for a minute, and then we'll hand it over to Eric to give us an idea of what kind of stuff that he does with his karting data when he's coaching people and things. Again, this is kind of our couple of weeks where we're bringing in different people, and they're just talking about, okay, you've gathered the data, we've got these basic things kind of figured out, and we're gonna, you've got 10 minutes, let's say, or 15 or whatever, a fairly short amount of time. What are the things you look at in your data really quickly, right? And that's what we're gonna cover today. So they looks like a good chunk of folks have answered the poll. In about 5 seconds, I'll stop it. So if you're in the middle of it, finish up real quickly, and then we'll share these results. Okay, let's end the poll, and let's share the results so everybody can kind of see it. Certainly Eric can see it as well. YouTube doesn't show these, so I always try to read a little bit of the top 3 or 4 of them, just so everybody gets an idea of folks that watch this, when on replay. But the number one in the group that we've got here today is 69% of you at home after the track event. That doesn't mean, since it's multiple choice, doesn't mean you didn't look at it, at the track. But a lot of people actually, when they get home, when they have a little bit extra time, they talk about it at home after the track event. The the one in second place is at the end of the track day, right there at the track, or if it's close enough to home, you maybe you'll do it there too. But 67%, so pretty close on that, and a very close third as well as after each session on the track at 63%. And the next closest one is just prior to the next track event. So some of the folks maybe either, more than likely what they do is they have done their data analysis work at the track, or when they got home, and then they look at it again just before they go to that same track again, just to kind of update in their own mind and make sure their gearing was correct and get themselves straightened up. So I appreciate the polling, fellas. It's very, very good and easy for us to it helps Eric understand maybe some of the stuff that he can refer back to this as he moves forward. So I'm going to stop sharing those results, get those out of your way, and then we're about ready. What we'll do is we'll turn it over to Eric. Eric, kind of set up the principle here. You've the stuff you're going to talk about. You have walked up to somebody, if we kind of think about it this way, you've walked up to somebody, they've got a Micron, they've downloaded their data, and you've got like 10 minutes to take a look, right? And what are the, some of the stuff that you will run through? The one thing that I also want to make sure is what Matt kind of talked about last week, and Peter Krause the week before that, was preparation is a big part of this. Boy, if you can have your screens set up and your profiles done, you fit more into that 10 minutes than trying to hit the buttons and kind of move stuff around, right? So Eric, let's take a look at some data that you've been working with a fella, and maybe introduce that a little bit, and then let's see what you would talk with him about as he comes off the track.
Sure. So a couple things there. Roger, you touched on creating your user profiles and kind of preparing to look at your data. So many of you that are kart racers, or in other forms of motorsports, on a race day, obviously you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to take care of your vehicle, whether it's a go-kart, a motorbike, a sports car. You've got to take care of other people on your team, all of that stuff. So let's say there's an hour in between P1 and the next time, practice 1 and qualifying, for example, in the morning. Realistically, in that time period, as most of us know that have been to the track, you maybe have 10 minutes to actually sit and look at data, because the rest of the time you're, having a drink of water, talking to people, debriefing about the car, doing all these other things, walking back and forth from wherever. So unlike, and I really like those poll results, because it's interesting seeing that we have people that review at the track, at home, and then before other events, and the percentage of what you guys are doing is almost identical, which maybe reading in a little bit too much, but it almost suggests that everyone is doing all 3 of those habits, which I think is great. And if you're not, you might want to consider doing those. What's interesting there is, at the track in particular, we can't sip a coffee and just take 2 hours to look at our data. We only have those 10 minutes. So having that preparation and that user profile set up is really, really important. So how Roger has set up this Race Studio analysis screen is personally how I like to set up mine, for the most part. So I like to have my GPS display on the left and my measures bar on the right, and then, my measures and laps on the left, and the measures graph on the right. That is the most intuitive way that I have found to look at AIM Race Studio data. And everyone's going to have their own preference, but regardless of what you do, just don't forget about your user profiles over here. You can set up multiple ones to quickly go through different things. So if I'm looking at someone's data, or they're approaching me and say, hey, I've opened my data, and now what? Especially if I don't know this driver, or I'm just looking at it for the first time, one of the very first things that I'm going to do as a quick overview is I'm going to pull up a few of their laps from one particular session. And of course, Race Studio has the ability to compare multiple sessions at the same time. But most of the time, I've found that drivers, and you guys can let us know in the chat box if you have differently. Typically, the first thing they want to do is they want to look at their last session that they just did. So let's say with this driver that they want to do that. So I'll go to my lap manager, and it looks like we have quite a few laps disabled, but I'll sort by my lap time. And I want to go with, my best few laps. So I can kind of, click on several different laps at the same time.
The one that's yellow is already the active lap in the way that Race Studio is presenting
Right.
you that data. Just so everybody that didn't understand that, that's how it kind of works.
So I'm going to pull up multiple laps, and then I will go back to this display area. And one of my favorite tools in Race Studio, and I touched on this in the first webinar I did, is the time compare bar at the bottom. And looking at multiple laps side by side is one of the best ways to, within those 10 minutes that you have, quickly look and say, okay, I did a 46.6 this lap, 46.8 that lap, and obviously there's a little bit of difference. Where am I gaining and losing that time? That's really the power of Race Studio 2. So in those 10 minutes, this is, one of the fastest things you can do to quickly understand the what. I talked about the three kind of W's that you want to understand: what, where, and why. The last time I was on this. So, here, of course, we can look at our time compare bar. Anytime we see what I like to kind of jokingly call spaghetti in the time compare bar, where the laps basically spread apart or they converge, is typically an area where we're seeing some inconsistency. So even without really understanding a lot of looking at, say, your speed trace or your RPM trace, if you can just look at the time compare bar down here, you're going to see that anytime those diverge or converge, something inconsistent is happening. And that's really important to understand. So simply, within just a few moments of when you first open the data, I can click in it, and I'm going to recenter our map here. So the first one I'll identify, of course, looks like this area here. Just for reference for everybody, on this particular track, the start-finish line is right about here in the AIM database. So this is, roughly our first turn. So we can see we have some inconsistency here. So that's going to be one of our areas to focus on in these next 10 minutes. Another area looks like it is turn 1 to turn 3. All right, I've got a request for per lap color, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. There we go. Is that a little bit better? Hopefully, Todd, that's a little bit better for you.
Eric keeping his eye on the chat box, huh? That's good.
Well, the chat pops right up in front of me, so I'm trying to be responsive.
Good for you.
And then looks like one of the following corners is also a little bit inconsistent. So we've got an issue in this corner, and we've got an issue in this corner. Now, this is almost the next level, but this would suggest that what we were doing in this corner here, which is turn 3, is affecting what is happening, I guess, in turn 5 there. So that's something that we want to consider as we look at the data a little bit closer. And last but not least, it looks like this corner here, and of course onto the straightaway, are some inconsistent spots. So in 10 minutes, that's a lot for us to look at. And typically what I've found, just as a driver coach, whether they are 5 or 65, if you give a driver more than about 3 or 4 things to work on in a lap, they're not going to be able to implement it. So sometimes it's also about identifying maybe some of these areas we'll get to next. And so we want to figure out where are the biggest issues. So
I love that. I love that you're using a tool that that is always there, and it is so quick. It doesn't even matter which graphs you have turned on in the main window. In the majors graph, by just having that time compare bar, you went straight there, and you just start to focus on that. And you don't even have to understand how to read a speed trace or what gear position you're in or anything. It's giving you those 3 W's, that, what happened, where it happened, why did it happen, and then you make your battle plan, right? Okay, now this happened, where did it happen in the corner, what, entry, braking, whatever, and then you figure out the why part of it, which is where we're heading. But the time compare bar, I just wanted to make sure I took a break and we chat about it with everybody, that time compare bar is, in my opinion, is the most powerful tool that we have as far as finding the right spots to go to work on. And it doesn't matter if it's in karting or whatever, it's where you gained or lost time. So great analogy and great way to start it off with where to go. And by the way, just so everybody knows, just like in the past, this data file and another data file we may or may not look at depending on time today are available for you. They will be linked in the description box in the YouTube video probably before the end of the day. The profiles that we've got built here that Eric talked about that he's going to use a little bit as we go through the day will also be linked and able for you to download and grab for later if you want some sample data. So thank you, Eric. Go ahead and continue on now that you figured it out from the time compare bar where you want to go next.
Right. So yeah, again, the time compare bar, fantastic tool. It's where I will look first in those 10 minutes. And truly, this is about the time range that you're going to have at a kart race, in my experience. So once I've identified 2 or 3 spots that I'm struggling in, the next question is to ask, okay, why am I struggling there, and really what's going on? So of all the spots that I see, this corner here and this one here are the 2 that, just looking at the time compare bar, I see the most, again, to use my little hokey term, spaghettiness, meaning the most spread and the most inconsistency. So I will use one of my zoom tools. I will hover, zoom in on that particular corner. So again, we've just kind of taken the track and now we're going to zoom in on it. And the first thing I'll do, and I recommend you all do, is look at the GPS driven line. So we can see here, as this driver enters the corner, his entry point is fairly similar, but right around a third of the way through his turn in, we start to see those lines separate. And that looks like, as you can see where all those lines converge, this driver is fairly consistent. That looks like roughly his apex, I think we can all agree. But the middle of the corner is where we're seeing that inconsistency. If we go over here to our measures toolbar and kind of drag our cursor along to where we see on the time compare bar everything spread apart, we can see that where that spread is happening correlates roughly to just after where we see the spread in our driven racing line. So that should tell us a little bit of a cue here that this is, obviously we have 3 main controls in the kart, right? We have our gas, our brake, and our steering. Of course, in race cars, you also have gearing and all of those things. And on a bike, you have your lean angle and all those fun things. But in particular, our driving line here is our issue. We can see just looking at the speed trace without delving into anything else, and I want to keep this very, very simple, that we see quite a deviation of speed here. Andy, the answer is, yeah, potentially you have someone going side by side on a lap, but let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that this is a practice lap, qualifying lap, they're by themselves. So let's just assume that. Typically, if you've met the driver, you know if they just came from a race or from a practice, hopefully if you're actually at the track. What concerns me is I start to see the deviation in my speed trace right around here, about a third of the way, maybe halfway through the corner. And that tells me that something in terms of our GPS driven line and just our line choice is really our core issue. If I wanted to delve a little bit further, I could dive into the longitudinal acceleration. I always like looking at them on separate graphs. And I can see here again, remember this is our longitudinal acceleration. This is our braking. Roger likes to call this the hockey stick kind of form here, where you have a deep braking zone and then it kind of levels off a little bit. And then we have all sorts of jostling through here in our longitudinal acceleration. What this tells me, at least in my interpretation, is part of why we have this inconsistency here in the middle of the corner has to do with the end of our braking zone. Part of, as many of you hopefully have figured out by now from driving a kart, especially if you only have one rear brake, karts don't really like to turn while you're also on the brakes. So in this particular corner, that might be something we want to look at and consider, where exactly we're starting to release the brakes. And because his entry is so consistent, but in the middle of the corner, we're starting to see that inconsistency, either sometimes a little bit tighter, sometimes a little bit wider. What that's telling me is that our speed and our approach to this corner might be where we're a little bit inconsistent. And where we're releasing the brake and how the car's starting to rotate to the middle of the corner is really where we're struggling. So that's the level that within these 10 minutes in this particular corner, hopefully you can reach after getting a little bit of experience and starting to look at your own data.
Perfect. That hockey stick is happening up in the speed trace as well. You can even see it even more there, the last third of the braking zone. Yeah, right there. And so you can see that the driver, it's either he's losing the braking ability, he's trading braking for cornering, or whatever. There's a what is happening there statement. Then it's our job to understand, obviously it's in braking, so we kind of know where to go look, and then the why. And another interesting thing that you kind of chatted about, which was you have the driver inputs, right? And I always what happened, where it happened, why did it happen, and then there's always that other piece of the why, which is, did the driver create the speed, that really cool extra couple miles an hour coming off, or was it the cart that did it, right? So you always have to separate out those two, and with the driver inputs, you end up being able to figure out that last sub piece of the why, which is always a critical thing. We lost time, gained time. Was that because something the driver did or something the cart did? And that's just the path of data analysis that we need to go through. I'm going to cover one as I hand it back to you. Mr. Vinstra, that talks about, am I the only one that uses the grid function in the GPS map all the time? That's the wonderful thing about these seminars. I know of it. I have turned it on. I've played with it a little bit. I typically don't. You have not seen it used in any of these webinars. I wrote myself a note. It's actually something that I'm gonna go and practice and check out a little bit, because yeah, we have that little scale bar down there in the lower right corner to try to understand that scalings. But maybe comment those grid lines on is a good thing. Maybe everybody else give that a shot in your own data as well. You can turn those grids off and on. So thanks for the comment, and it's something I think I'd like to try as well. Perfect. Okay.
John asked a question here. He's talking about his son. It's a really good question, where he's saying he's trying to analyze. PDX, I'm assuming, is that might be autocross. I'm a little bit unfamiliar.
Portland road course.
And he's saying that the GPS speed trace is a gentle wave, that things are so gentle that it's hard to analyze it. And it's not like kart track data where everything is so immediate. And he's saying, he's struggling with figuring out the why as a result. Roger, I think that's a really good question for you, as you've looked at so many different data files. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for John?
Well, GPS is a calculated speed, right? So and there is some filtering and some smoothness that has happened with it, and especially if you zoom in like crazy, you do end up with a bit of a smooth line. For John, what I would do if I was isn't this GPS speed? Okay. I would consider, if I was him, that leave your RPM up if all you have is that in RPM, and where there's that direct connection. Sometimes you can see the RPM change a little bit quicker, or if you need something that has even a little bit more direct correlation to the tire speed, where the GPS is a little bit more vehicle speed and a little bit filtered, that you go ahead and put a true wheel speed on especially the one of the rear tires. It's always good to see it there. So it just there is a bit of a smoothing on the especially the older stuff, and I think John has an older AIM device. The new GPS 08s has a little bit less smoothing on it, so you can you get a little bit more of a more real, almost perfectly realistic speed trace with the new hardware. So that's how I would answer that. And maybe Emiliano, I think Emiliano was gonna. We've got some folks in the background here working, answering some questions too. We've got Cameron and Robbie. Robbie is the link meister. He's been putting in links in the chat box. You've seen him already. Cameron's back today, and Brick. And Emiliano, who was maybe will have a little bit of even a better answer for that. Those questions and answers, if we try to hit those a little bit here during the talk, and maybe we don't hit it right, we're thinking of 12 things as we're chatting here. All of the questions and answers, it doesn't happen right away. But 2-3 days afterwards, the question and answers have been. We've tried to clarify the answers even more, and then we stick those as a downloadable file in the description box in the YouTube videos as well. So if you see a question come by and we answered it, maybe didn't fully answer it, or we missed it, it will show up later in the description box of the videos on YouTube. So perfect, Eric. Continue on.
Sure. So, you know, in the other 10 minutes, like I said, you know, we always have to keep in mind that very narrow time window because things can get away from you fast at a race. I wanted to look at this other area of the data. So in this particular area, I'm looking at this corner, which again, I'm just going to count my corners. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, basically turns 7, at least by my quick math there. This is an area where it looks like very consistently compared to our fastest lap, this is where we're giving up some time. You can see again, using my favorite tool, the time compare bar, almost every time through this corner, we're losing some time. So where here we might lose a little bit and then gain a little bit and vice versa, this one is pretty consistently a loss. So well, this is more rare to see in a data file with a driver. This is going to be something that if we focus on right now, this is something that he can go out, implement, and pick up some time. So this one definitely is someone to focus on. So again, using my GPS driven line map here, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. And sometimes if I'm working with a driver, maybe I'll open up the GPS you know, to my full screen if I have a small laptop, something like that, and just view them in isolation. But I think we can see this relatively well here, hopefully. And now I'm looking at this particular section of the lap. So again, I'll use my zoom control. Try and get this optimized for us. We can see on a driven line, again, kind of mid-corner, that's where we start to see that separation in our driven line. We can see on the speed trace, I'll go over here. It is just after the end of his braking zone. So this driver has similar habits or similar trouble spots to what we saw before. So I'm already starting to think maybe it's a similar kind of habit here that's costing us the same amount of time. You know, maybe that's something we need to think about. And we can see that again, his braking and his deceleration is very consistent looking at the longitudinal acceleration, where he's releasing the brakes or where it's starting to basically roll and transition into the corners, pretty consistent. But it almost looks like kind of right in this transition zone between where the kart is coasting and he's starting to pick back up on the throttle and we're going to, you know, slightly positive acceleration, that we're having our issue. So in this particular corner, my thought would be, and having a little bit of context can sometimes help with this. Keep in mind, we're coming from a sharp right-hand corner here. And now we're heading into a sharp left-hand corner. It almost looks like, to me, this is more what I would call a presentation issue. Are you viewing the corner necessarily from the right angle and consistently from the same spot? Even though we see our lines here overlapping with each other, we can see some inconsistency from the previous corner. So if you run wide and you're out of position in the previous corner, and now we're starting to come towards this corner and we're viewing it from different angles. One of my favorite exercises is to have drivers go out on a track and they'll stand at the same spot, but they'll turn a little bit one way, turn a little bit another way relative to the apex, and turning inward or turning outward to illustrate the point that if in a kart or a car, you're not tracking out from the same spot every time and approaching the corner from the same spot every time, well, your visual analysis and what you're going to do when you get to a corner is going to be different. So in this particular case, my suspicion is our inconsistency right here may be due to some inconsistency in the previous corner. This could be a lesson for this driver that, hey, look, we're starting to come towards a faster part of the track, right? We're starting to come towards a straightaway. We need to focus on sacrificing on a road course some of our speed, outright speed in, say, a corner like this, focusing more on a very clean line through this corner and the subsequent corners, because that's really where if we lose any particular time in the middle of the corner by turning it too early, not using all of the racetrack, all of those basic fundamentals that a lot of us have heard either from books or from other drivers, that is where we're going to really lose a lot of time. In this particular case, looking at the speed trace, it simply looks like, and maybe to make this a little bit cleaner, I'm going to get rid of a couple laps just to look at couple in isolation. It looks like, and again, keep in mind the blue is our fastest lap here, where the pink is slightly slower. looks like in general, we're entering this corner a little bit too narrow. Basically, we need to, as we come out of the corner before, track back across the track, get over to driver's right a little bit more to come through this left-hander a little bit better. So that would be something else that I would suggest to this driver, and that's really going to help, I think, the consistency out of this particular corner and hopefully help us gain a little bit more lap time.
Yeah, really, you have to tidy it all together, right? It's not just what the driver's doing. It's not just the kart. It's not just braking, but it's these 3 or 4 things that all affect, you know, the speed in through the middle and the speed out. And it's kind of our job to figure out, you know, which one of these things is at the, you know, what line to that corner is the best with these conditions and that kart and this driver and, you know, and these different things. So putting it all together, like you just talked, is an important piece of that. One question while you're kind of getting yourself ready. Andy asked that question. Do you ever look at vertical G to see if you got to the curbing bumps? Certainly, there's not a GPS based channel for that, and whether we have to be concerned sometimes whether or not the driver has calibrated that vertical Z axis sensor. But you can see the when you get a curb, you can see sometimes you can see the cracks in the pavement and all of that stuff, and it can really help you see how much of the bite of the curb you actually took. Every once in a while, you'll see a kart looks like it's over to the left and, you know, maybe really hit the apex curb. You can take a look at that vertical axis and say, oh yeah, he did, and that's why it moved over, you know, 4 or 5 feet on the exit. One of the places I really started to use that vertical G sensor was when we started to the Z-axis. You know, what is the plus and the Z-axis? It sits at 1G when you're sitting there, and when back to my story. Off-road racing is where I started to really use that. And now I've brought it into some road racing, karting. It's 1G all the time because that's just the weight of the, you know, the atmosphere pushing on us. And then when you hit a curb and it starts to push the cart up, the number gets bigger. You know, it might go to 1.5 Gs as it sits you into the seat. And then when you launch off the curb and you're heading and, you know, you're losing grip because it gets up to nearly 0 G. 0 would be if you're totally off the ground. But in the off-road world, I could see exactly when a car or a truck got into the air and it was in the jumping, and we could see exactly when it landed because the spike would be there for the landing. And then you could see when the driver was picking up the throttle and shifting in the air and all the different things that they like to do. So that Z-axis can be a helpful tool even in karting.
It can be. One other thing to note is often, especially with slower go-karts where there's less noise in the channels, looking at your lateral as well as the longitudinal G traces, you can actually see sometimes where the front of the go-kart will go over a bump and then the back will go over. Exactly. You'll see that spike in a longitudinal acceleration.
Exactly.
So another tool in your toolbox that I really love in the AIM Race Studio is the split time analysis. And so I'm a visual person. So for me, looking at the GPS driven line and the measures toolbar, that's more intuitive for me. But for some people that are numbers oriented, looking at the channels report or the split time analysis is another really quick way in those 10 minutes to at least identify the what. Where am I really struggling? So what we've done here, and recall in your lap manager, you can enable and disable laps. So to do this and really get some meaningful data of it, find your fastest lap and disable anything that is relatively far away. You can get as granular as you want. In this particular data set, we eliminated quite a few laps. The fastest was a 46.6 second lap. We eliminated anything above like a 47.5 second lap. Now, going back to the split time analysis, once we've done that, assuming it works here, come on.
It looks like
it's thinking.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and just click on that. That should bring it up. Let me try something, and
Okay.
let me have it for a second. Let me see if I can
Absolutely
load this one. Okay, if it wants to fight me, huh? I can see it's trying. Get that.
Well, when and if we can get this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'll talk about it while Roger plays. For those of you that aren't familiar with the split time report, what it is essentially is it breaks down the laps or a lap into sectors. If you've ever watched Formula One or anything, you know, live broadcast, you'll hear things talk about purple sectors or green sectors, and it breaks down the lap into different sections. And the split report is really great for looking at what are called split times, meaning the times within each of those sections. And it basically compiles a big long list of those. Being able to determine how many sectors should we use, that's a good question. The answer is it kind of depends on how granular you want to get. My suggestion would be, honestly, AIM's track map tool. When you go to create a track map in Race Studio, and there's some great tutorials on AIM's learnfast series on the YouTube channel. That's how I learned how to do it. I would just start with the standard amount. You can play with it and add or subtract as many you want. There we go.
Still, the track
Roger
map
looks
is,
so focused. Yes,
track map is still fighting me a little bit, which is kind of odd. Let me,
but anyway, here you can see the split report, and hopefully the track map will show up at some point. And one of my favorite things to look at is a line called standard deviation. So if we had the track map show up here, you would see those numbers at the top, which are basically your different corners around the track or your sectors. And that, yeah, exactly. And your standard deviation values as you go around the lap. That's a rough correlation, again, assuming you get most of your faster laps grouped together and you disable the outliers, that can tell you some of the areas where you're really struggling. So if you look at particularly this driver, we see in turn 1, we have the standard deviation of 0.059. In turn 2, we have something similar. And then in between turn 2 and 3, we don't have very much standard deviation, and we have less so in the subsequent one. So I'm not sure where the track map went.
yeah.
So sorry about that, guys. But
It's fighting us a little bit.
It is fighting us today. Technology has decided to take the reins. But the overall point is anytime I see a standard deviation, at least in karting data, that is above about a 0.05, it's cause for concern. And when you have that time away from the track and you can sit down and compare both the split time, and I urge you guys to do the split time as well as, you know, a traditional looking at your lines and looking at measure toolbar, look to see if the areas where one method tells you you're struggling, and then look at the split report and see if those two things don't correlate, and get comfortable with kind of how they correlate. And that standard deviation line in particular for me, when I have 10 minutes at the racetrack, is a really good way for me to identify areas that are struggle spots. And often, just for a driver, that, especially one that has a little bit more experience, if you just point out certain corners that they're struggling in, oftentimes you'll find that they know what they're supposed to be doing, and they just need a push to kind of remind them to focus on it. Others, however, want that why. They want to understand how to work on those areas. And so that brings me to kind of the post-data analysis part, which is if I'm looking at data with someone, and again, let's say I have, of the 10 minutes, I've looked at it for 7 minutes. Now I need to translate that, and rather than just say, you're doing this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, we need to now turn that into a series of goals. So for those of you that are here that are looking at your own data, this is a little bit harder to self-coach yourself, right? I kind of like to harken back to what I found doing driver coaching, which is, you know, kind of the power of 3. Try not to choose more than about 3 or 4 spots. It's really, really easy with data analysis to get sucked in and look at everything and want to fix everything all at once. But at least for me, I know I'm human, and when I get out on the racetrack, my brain capacity goes down by about 50% when the helmet goes on, and I can't remember every single thing I might have seen in a data file. So choose those biggest areas, find, you know, the 2 or 3 biggest struggle spots, and focus on those for the next session. And if you can focus on those, you'll just keep getting better, better, and better. If you are coaching a younger driver, this is extremely, extremely important. Well, as to a certain extent, the older you get, maybe you can retain a little bit more as you're driving. But whether you're young or old, limiting the amount of things that you focus on is going to be really, really important. And that is just as important, if not more, than the actual looking at the data and coming to those conclusions. Because we can look at this till the cows come home and say that, you know, we know what we need to do. But if we overwhelm ourselves with too many things to fix all at once, then we're going to struggle with the implementation of it. And so that's why I try to remind drivers that data is a tool. They still have to go out and still use it.
Yeah, we talk in Peter is Peter and Matt both pretty big on that action plan idea, right? Data is great and it's giving us some information, but really the end point, the goal, you go from point A of looking at your data and point B of implementing the changes to get faster. That's really what it's all about, right? So the last thing I'd like to chat about, if we'll see how it ends up working out here, but the other thing that you've saved here is a channels report. Again, we're talking about a short amount of time, so you've got your user profiles built. It's let's look at the home page, let's look at the split report, and go over some of the stuff that you so well talked about, and then boom, then the channels report. How would you set this up, and what kind of good would that do you as a user talking to your of your own data, or coaching somebody else?
Well, I think this one, the channels report, personally, I don't use as much. I think in karting in particular, this is a great one if you want to look at, say, a gearing change. So the other data set that we have, that we said if we had time, we might get to, we were talking before about potentially a gearing change. This would be a great thing if you want to play with clutch setups, or you want to see how am I doing in that slowest corner? Do my driving improvements actually change, say, my average speed? I think that this one, the channels report, is really great for comparing multiple sessions together. It's a great quick way to intuitively say, look, I fixed that corner and my average speed went up. Therefore, I'm carrying more speed through the lap. The RPM channel is another great one. If you're trying to dial in certain gearing, say you have an engine builder that is giving you a recommendation of, your average RPM should be here or your peak RPM should be here. That is what I like the channels report for. The other thing that this can be helpful for is, we had a couple questions or comments in the discussion forum that I think we've gotten a raise since, but about chassis handling or about part performance. If you start looking at, let's say, the longitudinal, the lateral, and you start seeing numbers that, let's say you go on a practice day and you know that, my kart's really happy at this particular track when I have, 1 to 1.5 G's lateral acceleration, and I start seeing numbers outside of those bounds, I can start making some conclusions, rough conclusions about, wow, I'm really either overdriving this, or the track has a lot more grip, or these are things that I haven't seen before. So the channels report, to me, is a great tool for that. Another thing that you hit on, Roger, earlier was you can start to see a trend in the data. So this particular driver, it looks like we got faster and faster and faster throughout the session, and about lap 10 was our fastest. So maybe this particular driver, this sort of setup, maybe their tire pressures, their mentality, it looks like they're starting to peak a little bit later in the run. If this was going to be, you wanted to go for your fastest lap in qualifying, and you looked at this, maybe this would be cause for concern. Maybe you have a 5-minute session instead of 15 laps. Maybe there's something there to draw a conclusion from. Looking at trends in those numbers can sometimes be something here that's helpful.
Yeah, and the channel report is all about trends. It's giving you whatever values you wish to put in here. You got the add remove button, so you could pick whatever channels you wish, but it's allowing you to see, this is the minimum speed per lap, so it's typically the slowest corner on the track, and you can look at how the kart is handling and how consistent the driver is through the slowest corner. Average speed is just speed divided by the number of feet traveled, and then the max speed, and he hit his max speed here on lap 9, and held it for two laps in a row. The kart was running pretty well. Fell off, and we're talking half a mile per hour or something, so it's pretty darn close. Here's your minimum speeds in every for the lap, again matching probably with this over here. If you've got a kart that has a clutch and you're looking for where's the clutch hitting and how well is it doing, these are some things you can start to look at, what gearing for your maximum RPM. And one that a lot of people really enjoy to use, and one I'd like to zero in on here a little bit, is this distance number. That is the distance that this driver drove, that full lap, that rollout distance. So let's say the driver is inconsistent and is trying to learn the track, and maybe is going wide on one corner and narrow on another. You'll end up with some pretty big differences here on the actual feet driven of the cart. In this particular case, if you look at these numbers fairly closely, they're actually fairly close, right? You know, if I forget the first two six and just looking at the last two digits, you know, 59, 68, 62, you know, these are all within 7 or 8 feet of each other, as you know, and then and ironically enough, the shortest, or yeah, the shortest distance
Shortest
driven happened
distance
to
is
be
the
the fastest
fastest.
lap. Doesn't always work that way, but you know, maybe that tells you something as well, right? So there's all sorts of little nuggets around here that you can you know, kind of take a look at. So the channel report is a very powerful tool. Okay, if we kind of go back to some of the questions as we kind of start to tidy this up, if I go back to, you know, he mentions, somebody mentions the lap manager. Is there 2 reference laps? Boy, there shouldn't be. You know, if there if there is, you know, the reference lap typically is your fastest lap, and it's marked by reference, and then you can see your percentages from there. So hopefully you don't have more than 1 reference lap. And then let's jump back to this guy as we kind of finish up. You see any questions there, Eric, that strikes you as something you might want to cover?
Here's a good one from Antonio. He says, to have a deeper knowledge of what is happening, do you recommend to use the steering velocity and quarter radius math? That is something that I was honestly unfamiliar with until Roger showed me. And the answer is yes. I think that that's actually a really cool math channel that we were looking at a data set from about 1.5 years ago. And it's fantastic for, you know, whether I would say look.
Oops, your microphone went out on us again. There it came back. There it came back. The steering velocity, I'll add on to what Eric was saying. Steering velocity, obviously, you're going to have a steering position sensor. Not a ton of karts have that, but the ones that do, you could then see how quickly the driver is changing his hands. But I will go. When we talk about the corner radius math, I don't have that in this data, but we've talked about that in several other webinar videos a lot. I happen to be a huge believer of that. I like to see exactly how tightly the driver is driving, and that gives us a quantifiable number as to how big a radius, and if they're tightening up their radius or opening their hands on their way out. And then GSUM in karting is not as valuable in karting, in my opinion, as it is with cars. It's the GSUM is really that measure of how you are, you know, the sum of the G's, both longitudinally and vertically, and then and how the driver is transitioning from one to the other. And karting is such a brutal change of direction thing that a lot of times you actually start to turn into the corner before you ever hit the brakes, so you don't get this nice, you know, gorgeous, you know, friction circle looking thing. And then the GSUM as well, you're transitioning corners first before you actually hit the brake. So if you're going to use GSUM, you just have to keep in mind that karting sometimes does it. The look of a GSUM might look a little bit different and still be very good. So if you're going to do that, we have the math channels. Write me an email at the end if you don't have them all. I'll send you a document that has some information about the channels. It includes the GSUM, it includes the corner radius, plus a bunch of other things, and I'd be more than happy. GSUM works pretty good in the bike world. You do some different things with the lean angle, but the GSUM still, especially if you're using the GPS-based ones, GPS-based lats and longs, the GSUM is still a very valuable channel in the bike world. It'd be fun to use. I also saw one that Joe Chapman went by there, said he is not getting too often, and this is something I've seen occasionally. These distances are not showing up. And what I have found that will fix that, it's a workaround possibly, but if you've used the track learning mode, where it's using a different start-finish line every time it does it, sometimes those distances do not show up. It's just zeros there. If you ever run into that and you want those distances, it's a critical thing that you want to do. If you do a GPS lap insert and just recreate the laps, the distances here will then show up. So there's a workaround if you've run into that where you're not seeing these numbers. It's almost always because it didn't have the track map start finish line coordinates that are part of our system. So do a per lap GPS lap insert, and you will get those distances. Okay. Let's go back to the home base, and you have anything else that you want to cover? I haven't read through that one, so I don't know what it says. Have you had a chance to look at it there, Eric, as we move on?
And by that you mean this particular data file
Yeah.
itself? Um,
Greg's question there.
Greg's question. So Greg's question is probably, again, something that I would almost defer to you a little bit about. So he's talking about track maps that have multiple sections. He's asking on, I'm assuming, he says dash. I don't know if he means Micron 5. Greg, perhaps you can clarify.
Yeah.
But basically he's saying, is there a different way to see time delta rather than at the end of the lap or as an instantaneous split? Can you show on the dash different split times? I believe.
Yeah, let's take just a minute to talk about that one, and then we'll probably close it up. The answer is yes, right? To almost anything of that, all the different ways you explained it and what he said it. If you want to, we can take the track map in Race Studio 3 track map database, and we can put splits in there, right? At the 1/3 points, kind of like Formula One kind of style-ish, right? If that's what you're after. And then as you are driving, the lap counter on your Micron 5 will go along, and then when you hit that predetermined coordinated split point, it will come up and tell you, how much faster, slower you were in that split. But that is it is not all that often used anymore, because as you're driving, then you have to look down at that hard-coded point, right, and see how you did in that split, Greg. And what most people do nowadays is they just go ahead and use the predictive lap timing, and then they don't put hard-coded splits into the map, but rather have the Micron 5 or the MXG or any of our AIM devices. Whenever you get a chance to look down, you can look down and see overall for this entire lap where you are. And what most people do is, let's say, I'm putting the cursor in the data that we're looking at here. Let's say you come out of this corner and you look down while you're heading up this straightaway, and you want to know, how did I do in this first segment, right? How did I get through these two, back-to-back 180-degree corners? As you look down, yeah, it's going to give you a number, and it might be not exactly, hey, you were 3/10 quicker in that segment. But as you're coming off that straightaway corner and heading down, if it's counting the right way, you came off that corner really well, right? Most people like it that way, instead of having that one hard-coded or two hard-coded spots on a lap where you have to look down right after those. They'd rather be able to look down and see their predictive at all times. So the hard-coded splits, why we can do it, is not as popular anymore. So you do it as you wish. Okay. I didn't look over and see any of those. Any of those questions are something you think we might want to cover, Eric, or you think we're good?
Looks like we have another question about Race Studio 3, which I think could be interesting, but that might be something
that's a little outside of our scope. So the guys, I'm sure, are answering that one in the background, and if you've seen that question go by, we'll have the answer for that in the Q&A. Kind of as we're, I know you got something to say there. I'm going to launch one more poll as we kind of get ready, and if those of you that are here and taking a look at the poll, future webinar topics. This is one we haven't done in a while, and I'd love to see what everybody thinks. While everybody's doing that, Eric, you look like you had something you might want to add to that. What do you think?
Well, I think that there's a lot of great tools in the Micron 5 or in the AIM product line, such as the predictive lap time.
Yeah, exactly.
However, in my experience, at least with karters, I tend to suggest turning those off in my own driving, as well as I've experienced with other drivers. They tend to really fixate on that number, and I think that's great. But I think that there is a time and place for those things as well. So just my 2 cents, those that are using the predictive time, I think it's an amazing tool. But I think unless you really, really, really find that's your best way to coach yourself on the track, taking intermittent breaks to drive, implement what you have so far, then digest the next bit of information, and then implement it kind of in a stepwise process rather than trying to do both at the same time.
Yeah, I will agree with you, Eric. our products, the predictive lap timing being one of those things, we have so many tools that you can use that the only thing I would say differently is if predictive lap time, try it out. If it works for you, then I'm glad we have it for you, right? I have seen any number of people that screw up a really good lap because they're looking at that predictive lap time coming up to the last corner, and they really hustle that last corner, right? And because they're under their best or the track
Right.
record or whatever it happens to be, and they the predictive kind of catches them out every once in a while. But other drivers that I've worked with, the predictive lap timers is everything, right? They love to have that carrot out there, and they love to know instant feedback to them, and that's why we went not only from numbers to the lights on a Micron 5 now. The shift lights can be lighting up green or red depending on if you're faster or slower, so you don't even have to look at the gauge. So there,
Right.
it's whatever tool works for you, and I am just super pumped that we have so many tools that that people can make those decisions on. So all pretty cool. Let's go ahead and end the polling on future webinar topics, and let's look at them a little bit as we are on the way out. Let me share those results. What I'm seeing here is and everybody else is saying too, 74% of you want to continue to see data analysis things. That's actually down a little bit from before, which I am tickled about, because we have been hitting data analysis hard, and we're going to continue on because that really is a big part of what we do, obviously. So don't worry about that. But the next closest one is configurations. We've talked a little bit about them, but we want to continue on and do some more techie, hardware kind of stuff and configuration, setting stuff up. Perfect. The next one is sensors, something we haven't touched on a lot, and I've seen that number grow as we do this poll occasionally. So let's chat about that, maybe in the nearer future. Calibrations, track maps, pretty darn close. CAN, ECU protocols, CAN, those kind of things. We've got some things in the in our bag of dates coming up that I think are covering a lot about what you've talked about there. So be ready for that as well. Let me stop sharing those results, and as I am starting to go back and share the other way, Eric, you got anything you can kind of close us out with as I start to go back to the presentation?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that I think back to is, hopefully my goal with coming on here was to talk about some of the things you can do in those 10 minutes that you have at a car race. But always keep in mind that this data is a tool, and that the implementation is at least half, if not the most important half of what you're doing. I love data and utilizing it with a variety of drivers, both from inexperienced to very advanced. But then the communication or the internalization that you go through is just as important. The other thing that I think I would really urge everyone to do is check out the next webinar, because it's going to go over what we talked about here, but branch more into, okay, now we've gone back to our hotel, or we've gone back home, or we've gotten back from the track, and now we've got a lot more time. We can really go into a long form analysis. We can write notes. We can do whatever it is that we need to do to properly digest this. And rather than doing everything in 10 minutes, now we've got more time. And I think that that's going to be a really good webinar to follow up on from this one, because I think it's going to be fundamentally a slightly different approach. And based on the polling I saw today, where some of you look at data at the track, you look at it before the next race, and you also look at it at home, about the same amount of people do that. So it's very important for you guys to learn how to master and get some tips on that as well.
And I agree. The idea, and that's the way I did it when I was doing a lot of production data work at the track. I don't do as much as I used to, but I would always look at it right away. Maybe we look at vehicle health things, right, and some basic driver tools to help the driver get a little bit better. But I always would look at it a second time when I had a little bit more time, when I could, just away from the stress of the moment, and then be able to dig down and follow some of those rabbit trails, right, and figure some things out, and then make a bigger action plan for the next day. So perfect. And let's talk about the next what the next webinar is and what it's going to be right after this slide. We take all of our all of these videos, currently 99 of them up here and growing videos on the YouTube site. This one will be up there within about an hour or so. The up on our YouTube site, and we've just been throwing tons and tons of data up there, getting lots more subscribers and lots of views. We appreciate that, but more so, it's great that we're able to do these and give all of this good information and to everybody. So love being able to do that. So go visit the YouTube site. So I always go the wrong way with that. The customer support, as I've always said, we're a customer support company that happens to sell racing electronics, right? So give us a holler, catch us at the track. Boy, all of myself, all of our guys, many of our dealers, obviously too, are always willing to be there and help you out as much as we can. So make sure you do that. Eric mentions the next webinar. Here it is. We're going to announce it on Thursday. We're going to have our friend James Colburn back. James is going to come join us, and what we're going to, again, we're on a bit of a path here. So the next thing we're going to talk about is you've taken your 20-minute, your 10-minute, your 15-minute quick data analysis that we've been chatting about the last 3 or 4 of these webinars, and now we're going to take that to the next step. We're going to come back and do some more data analysis right out of the car or the bike or the, whatever it happens to be here in the next weeks as well. But James Colburn's going to come and talk about it. Okay, we've looked at our 3 or 4 data sets as we've gotten out of the car. We've made those quick action plans. We've tried to implement them. Now all of a sudden we've got a little bit of time. Let's head back to the hotel, to the motor home, whatever, wherever you have a minute when it's quiet, and let's look at end of the day data analysis. Let's put this all together. Let's talk about all the different things that might entail that. Maybe it's adjusting the driver and some of the things we're going to do there. Maybe it's adjust the shift lights. Maybe it's adjust sensors, calibrations, whatever it happens to be. Right, at the end of the day, what do we do? So let's this one will be a great one. Looking forward to James joining us and doing that as well with us. So and it'll be James. James has been with us, I think, 3 previous times, so this will be his 4th time co-hosting, and James always gets very, very high marks from everybody. So looking forward to that as well. So the gosh darn it, I went the wrong way again. To kind of close this one out, again, I thank you, Eric. Another stellar explanation of karting data and just data in general, and how you approach it when you have such a short time to do it, which is pretty typical in karting. I appreciate you coming. I appreciate all of the AIM guys in the background that's been answering questions like crazy back there and helping everything out, and Robbie throwing the links up there into the chat box. I appreciate that too. Eric, you have anything to kind of add on our way out the door?
Just thank you everyone for supporting the AIM product. Thanks for coming out and engaging with this. I mean, the fact that we're here talking about fundamentally a piece of electronic equipment really shows that there's more to this than just a logger in your car or on your cart. There's a community behind it, and there's passion for it. As Roger's alluded to, data, whether it's on your bike, in your car, or on your go-kart, there's a lot of parallels between the different ones. I've been enjoying learning a lot about the different subsets of motorsports. So thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I do like talking about this stuff a lot, and really like the AIM product, very passionate about it. So hopefully we'll be chatting soon.
Absolutely. And again, thank you very much, Eric. Eric and I have already chatted about his 3rd webinar that we will do here in a few weeks, where we take the karting one from the quick one, and then maybe we look at the end of a day or something in a karting, or some more in-depth stuff based on what some of our feedback is and some of the stuff that Eric and I hear after this one. So again, thank you, Eric. Thanks to all of our guys. This is the end of this one. I look forward to seeing everybody on in just a couple of days with James and looking at data in more detail at the end of the day. So thanks everybody for coming, and we'll talk to you later.